Hi, everybody. Before I talk about this week's readings, I just want to reflect a little on last week's readings and the conversation. The first thing I want to do is thank all of you for an unbelievable conversation. Um, Part of the goal in graduate school is to feel like students are leading the learning and the conversation. Actually, I hope that that might be the goal in general, in all educational experiences, but I think it's particularly applicable to graduate school. And that's certainly what happened this week. I was really blown away by your observations, by your expertise, um, by your philosophies, and thought that you were incredibly thoughtful, brought up things that I would have never thought of connecting to our learning. And I personally learned a tremendous amount from all of you. So thank you so much. We went through a wide array of topics. Again, many more than I thought would be brought up. I actually thought Diego gave a great list of just some of the things that we had talked about. So make sure to go to his post and look at them. I want to mention just a couple of things that struck me about our conversation. The first thing that struck me is how I thought that we would have a conversation when talking about families, about the composition of families, particularly about issues of gay and lesbian families, about issues of divorce. And what struck me is in our conversation, we spent a lot of time talking about the impact of geography and nationality. And it made me really appreciate the fact that this class is online, and therefore, sorry, the sun's coming in here, and therefore we have the benefit of all of us being in different places and being able to bring in our own experiences living across the world, but also being able to bring in our own backgrounds and our own nationalities and our own cultures into the conversation. The second thing that struck me was our conversation about the Pew Study and how at times it seemed challenging for us to move beyond this idea of loss, which I think for some of us is inherent in reading the Pew Study, and moving towards a feeling of opportunity and discovery. And I just want, as we move forward, for us to keep that in our mind, this idea of seeing the changes that are happening in 21st century Jewish identity in the United States, that if we continue to see it as a loss, I think it closes the door to moving forward. And I think that when we see it as information important for us as we move forward, the door remains open. One of the other things that struck me is the struggle that is inherent in balancing our own beliefs as teachers with those of our families, and how we stay true to who we are while remaining open to our families. And where is that line? And that's something that we'll continue to talk about as well. One of the things I really appreciated was how talkless our conversation was so often, and that we've already come up with some really profound real-world examples, connecting the theory of what we're talking about to our actual lives as educators. So keep that coming. I think that's really important. A lot of our conversation reminded me of Pearson, the first video that we saw. When Pearson said in the video, no significant learning can occur without significant relationship. And that, I think, connects to one of the salient points in this week's unit, which is that, and last week's as well, which is that families choose to participate in educational Jewish activities and organizations increasingly on the basis of relationships, not simply activities. And so we're going to be talking a lot about the importance of building meaningful relationships with families and with community. As we move forward, I want to connect something that Miriam actually said in one of her blog posts about pluralism. And she talks about how pluralism requires everyone to feel a bit uncomfortable. And I think that really segues beautifully to the topic of this week, one of the topics of this week, which is vulnerability. one of the goals, I think, of this course is to move beyond the idea of welcoming families into our classroom to that of creating meaningful partnerships. Now, we're going to continue to explore the difference between welcoming families and creating a partnership as our course continues, but I just want to highlight one difference for this week. Welcoming means greeting someone in a pleasant manner. It doesn't require a shift of power. Inherent in this idea of creating partnerships rather than just welcoming is that partnerships require a sense of shared obligation, responsibility, and creation and co-creation. So it means moving in creating partnerships. This also requires that we move beyond a conversation about what we think families should be doing and instead open ourselves to the reality of what is actually happening and how getting this information about what is actually happening is necessary if we're going to create meaningful and connective educational experiences for our students and for our families as well. Now, doing so, I think, requires a certain decentering of our egos as educators. It reminds me of a great talk I once heard from a middle school educator who was recounting the changing role of educators in American society. She shared that when her grandfather was a child, he went to a one-room schoolhouse, and there he received the information necessary to become an educated person from his teacher. And that this information that his teacher provided wasn't available anywhere else. It was even before the Encyclopedia Britannica came out, where you could look up information, in order for him to know not just math and learning how to read, but the responsibilities of the presidency, or when the date of the American Revolution was and why it occurred. All those things came directly from the teacher to him. And she talked about this shift from that model to a model now in which she is not there to fill up her students with information because it's all out there. They can Google all of those facts and figures. So instead, her job is to help her students synthesize all the information that is out there. And her job is also to help her students create meaning from this information. So because of the technological revolution that we're living through, this idea of educators being experts, like what her grandfather experienced, is waning. Instead, we are finding ourselves providing differentiated learning opportunities, facilitating rather than leading conversations, and asking many, many more questions than answering them. In some ways, this feels very Talmudic to me, actually. And I think this concept is true with our families, not just with our students in the classroom. And I think that it might help us to think about this paradigm shift when we're thinking about our relationships with families and communities. So all of this, I think, really radical change requires us to embrace a certain amount of discomfort because our role as educators is changing. And also for us to practice empathy, both for other teachers and also for our families and for our students. And this directly then leads into this week's readings. Both Brown and Small allude to the importance of tolerance and vulnerability when creating partnerships with families. As educators, I think it's really essential for us to recognize the feelings of vulnerability that can come up in families when they allow others to influence their children and, in fact, their familial choices. In fact, Brown asserts that parenting is a shame minefield, with parents often feeling and being judged, and that it can be one of the most vulnerable endeavors in which human beings might engage. In one of her books, she writes, "You can't claim to care about the welfare of children if you're shaming other parents for the choices they're making." Now, in her book, Small describes the ways in which biology and culture shape our expectations of our children and our parenting styles and choices, often in ways that aren't immediately apparent to us. We've already begun this conversation actually last week when we talked about the importance of geography, nationality, and culture and how they impact our relationship with families and the choices that families make. So I love that we have already started this conversation, and I'm hoping that Small will help deepen our understanding of this. I think Small provides a really unique perspective to the study of childhood and of parenting by considering both cultural and biological aspects of raising children. I think she's a really unique voice in this conversation. I just want to also point out, going back to Brown's video, there was a part of me that hesitated to have us look at this video, even though it's one of my personal favorites, because it felt for a moment like there was a little bit of self-help in her video. Why are we talking about our own vulnerability when we are on the topic of creating connections with families and with communities? And I'm curious, in our time on the discussion board, I'm curious about your response to this video and why you think I might have chosen it within the context of this topic, and whether it was helpful in terms of what it might require of us as educators. So I want to put that question out. I very much look forward to our conversation. This is a particularly long session. It goes until October 20th because of all the Chagim. So we're going to have a long time on our discussion board. So make sure when you can to post and check other people's posts. Please video if you haven't. I find video challenging. I also have discovered that it was really meaningful to see you all on video and to listen to your voices, to your cadence, to see your expressions. It really meant a lot to me, and I think created even more connection in our learning environment. So I really encourage you to video if you haven't already. I also encourage you to make sure to look through both. Last week I split you up into two groups. Please make sure that you've read the other group's comments, not just your own. You only were required to respond to and post on one group, but I really want to make sure that everybody is reading both groups because the conversations were just so rich. Finally, I want to remind you that your first reflection paper is due also on October 20th. Please make sure to check the rubric and double check it just to make sure that you've covered everything. And I've also included prompts as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Also, you can make a time to Skype with me if you'd like as well. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you all have a very sweet and very meaningful new year, and I look forward to hearing more from you. Okay, take care. Bye.